I never thought I would touch another cigarette. 15 years since I quit, 15 years of telling my students that smoking was a slow suicide, of watching Miriam's proud smile when I threw away that last pack. But here I stand at the back door of our farmhouse, the Vermont winter pressing against the glass like a memory I cannot shake, and my fingers know exactly how to hold this thing. The flame trembles as I light it. My hands are not steady anymore. Inside, the house hums with warmth and expectation. Miriam's laughter spills from the kitchen where she's preparing her famous apple crisp, the same recipe her mother used, the same one she'll pass to Ivy someday. Our daughter is home for the holidays, 22 now, and carrying herself with that particular confidence of young women who believe the world will bend to their will. I used to have that certainty. I used to believe in the shape of things. The cigarette tastes like rebellion, like the boy I was before I learned to be careful. Before I learned that some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. Snow begins to fall in fat, lazy flakes that catch the light from our kitchen window. Each one dissolves the moment it touches the ground, but more keep coming, persistent and soft. I watch them settle on the old wooden bench beneath the bare maple tree. That bench has sat in the same spot for 25 years, weathered gray by seasons of sun and storm, but unchanging. Constant. Like a gravestone marking something that was buried but never quite died. I reach into my wallet, my fingers finding the photograph by instinct. The leather is worn thin from years of handling, though I pretend I never touch it. The picture is small, creased at the corners, faded to the color of old honey. Two boys at summer camp, 1996. Arms thrown around each other's shoulders, faces bright with the kind of joy that feels impossible now. We are 17 in this photograph. We are invincible. We are everything we will never be allowed to become. I trace the edge of his face with my thumb, careful not to smudge what remains of the image. Julian. Even his name in my mind feels like speaking a prayer in a language I was taught to forget. In the photograph, his dark hair falls across his forehead the way it always did when he laughed. His eyes hold that particular light, the one that made me feel like I was the only person worth looking at in a world full of faces. Before life happened, before I learned that love was not enough, that wanting was not the same as having, that some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. Before I chose safety over honesty, silence over song. I slipped the photograph back into my wallet just as headlights sweep across the snow, cutting through the early darkness like a blade. A car is pulling into our driveway, slow and uncertain, as if the driver is unsure they have found the right address. My heart begins to race in a way it has not raced in decades, a drumbeat of recognition that starts in my chest and spreads through my entire body like fever. From the kitchen, Miriam calls out, her voice warm and curious. Are we expecting someone? The question hangs in the air between us, though she cannot see me through the glass door, cannot see the way my face has gone pale, cannot know that I am already crumbling. I do not answer her. I cannot answer her. Because I already know who it is, have known from the moment those headlights turned into our drive. Some part of me has been waiting for this moment for 23 years, holding my breath through 2 decades of marriage and parenthood and the careful construction of a life that looks exactly like what everyone expected it to look like. The car comes to a stop near the front porch. It is a small sedan, dark blue or black, ordinary in every way except for the fact that it carries the one person I never thought I would see again. Through the windshield, I can make out a figure behind the wheel, motionless, perhaps gathering courage or perhaps questioning the wisdom of this moment. I take a long drag from the cigarette, feeling the smoke burn my throat, welcoming the sharp sensation because it is real and immediate and keeps me tethered to this moment instead of floating away into panic. My reflection stares back at me from the glass door, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt and jeans, gray threading through his hair, lines etched around his eyes from years of smiling at appropriate moments. I look like someone's father, someone's husband, someone who has never harbored secrets that could tear apart everything he has built. But beneath the surface, I am still 17 years old, still that boy who wrote love letters he never sent, who lay awake at night wondering what it would feel like to live honestly, to love without apology, to choose desire over duty just once in his careful, measured life. The car door opens. Even in the growing darkness, even through the falling snow, I would recognize that silhouette anywhere. Tall and lean, moving with the same quiet grace I remember. Julian steps out of the car and looks up at the house, his breath visible in the cold air. He does not see me standing here in the shadows, watching him like a ghost watching the living. 23 years. 23 years of silence and distance, and the letters I never answered, the phone calls I never returned, the invitations I declined without explanation. 23 years of telling myself that I made the right choice, that safety was worth the price, that love was a luxury I could not afford. Now he is here, standing in my driveway like an answer to a question I stopped asking long ago. He looks older, of course. His hair is silver at the temples, and there are lines around his eyes that were not there when we were boys. But something essential remains unchanged, something I recognize in the way he stands, the way he tilts his head slightly as he studies the house. Miriam calls out again from the kitchen, louder this time, and I hear her footsteps approaching. She will be here in moments, will see me standing in the dark with this cigarette in my hand and questions in my eyes. She will open the door to greet our unexpected visitor with the same gracious warmth she brings to everything, and I will have to watch my two worlds collide. We'll have to pretend that the ground is not shifting beneath my feet. I drop the cigarette and crush it under my heel, then immediately regret the waste. I had planned to smoke the whole thing, to give myself more time to think, to prepare for whatever comes next. But time has run out, as it always does, and I am left standing here with nothing but the taste of smoke in my mouth and the echo of my heartbeat in my ears. Julian reaches into the back seat of his car and pulls out a small overnight bag. He is planning to stay, then, at least for a night. The thought terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure, a combination of emotions I have not felt since I was young enough to believe that wanting something badly enough could make it real. He closes the car door and begins walking toward the front porch, his footsteps muffled by the snow. In a moment, he will ring our doorbell or knock on our door, and this careful life I have constructed will begin to change in ways I cannot control or predict. Everything I have built, everything I have chosen, everything I have sacrificed will be tested by the simple fact of his presence. I close my eyes and try to remember how to breathe. The doorbell rings just as Miriam reaches the hallway, her footsteps quick and light on the hardwood floors we refinished together 3 summers ago. I hear her pause, probably smoothing her apron, checking her reflection in the mirror by the coat closet. She has always been beautiful in that effortless way some women possess, though she has never quite believed it. Even now, at 46, she moves through our home with the grace of someone who has made peace with her place in the world. I am 48 years old. I teach American literature at the same high school where Miriam and I met during our senior year, where we were crowned homecoming king and queen, where everyone said we made the perfect couple. I have been teaching Thoreau and Whitman and Dickinson to 17-year-olds for over 2 decades, standing in front of them with my pressed shirts and careful words, talking about transcendence and truth and the courage to live authentically. The irony is not lost on me. Our farmhouse sits on land that has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather worked these fields, raised dairy cattle, built the stone walls that still mark our property lines. My father expanded the house, added the wraparound porch and the large kitchen where Miriam now spends her mornings before heading to her job at the local library. I inherited not just the land but the weight of continuity, the expectation that I would carry forward what came before. Miriam opens the door, and I hear her surprised intake of breath, then her voice, warm and welcoming as always. "Oh my goodness, can I help you?" There is genuine pleasure in her tone, the reflexive hospitality of someone who was raised to make strangers feel at home. She invites him in from the cold, asks if he would like coffee or tea, mentions that the snow is getting heavier. I should join them. I should walk into that hallway and greet Julian like the old friend he supposedly is, shake his hand, clap him on the shoulder, ask about his drive and his life, and all the safe, surface things that old friends discuss when they have not seen each other in decades. Instead, I remain frozen by the back door, listening to their voices drift through the house like music I once knew by heart. Julian's voice has deepened over the years, but it carries the same careful cadence I remember, the way he always spoke slowly, as if weighing each word before releasing it into the world. He tells Miriam he was passing through on business, mentions something about architectural consulting, Says he hoped it would not be an imposition to stop by. The lies come easily, smoothly, though I suspect Miriam senses something beneath them. She has always been intuitive that way. Our life here follows rhythms that rarely change. Sunday mornings mean pancakes and the newspaper spread across the kitchen table. Fall means stacking firewood in perfect rows against the barn, preparing for winter like generations before us. Miriam tends her garden with the same devotion her mother showed to hers, growing tomatoes and herbs and flowers that fill our house with color during the brief Vermont summer. We attend the high school football games, host dinner parties for our neighbors, take quiet vacations to places where other quiet couples go to reaffirm their quiet love. But beneath the surface of this carefully constructed life, there are spaces that remain unfilled. Miriam and I sleep in the same bed, but rarely touch anymore, our bodies having learned to navigate around each other in the dark. We make conversation over dinner about Ivy's graduate program, about the new curriculum at school, about anything except the growing distance between us. I see her watching me sometimes, her eyes holding questions she has learned not to ask. Ivy notices things her mother pretends not to see. During her visits home, she comments on the way I lose myself in books for hours, the way I flinch slightly when Miriam reaches for my hand, the way certain songs on the radio make me leave the room without explanation. She is young enough to believe that love should be visible, obvious, that people who choose each other should look at each other the way she and her college boyfriend do. All heat and urgency and certainty. In my study upstairs, hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk beneath old lesson plans and in used grade books, there is a small wooden box. Inside that box are letters, dozens of them, postmarked from Seattle and Portland and San Francisco, all addressed in Julian's careful handwriting. They span decades. Most I never opened. Some I read once and immediately regretted. One arrived just 2 weeks ago, and I held it in my hands for an hour before sliding it back into the box, unread. I stopped writing years ago, though I once dreamed of being a novelist. In college, I wrote stories about men who lived authentic lives, who chose love over convention, who found the courage to speak truths that society preferred to keep hidden. My professors praised my work, said I had talent, encouraged me to pursue an MFA. Instead, I chose teaching, chose stability, chose the safe path that led me back to this house, this land, this life that looks exactly like what everyone expected it to look like. Now Julian is here, sitting in my living room, accepting Miriam's offer of dinner, talking about the weather and his drive and the changes he has noticed in the town since his last visit. When was his last visit? I try to remember if he ever came here, if he ever saw this house, this life I built in his absence. The memories blur together, 23 years of silence collapsing into this single moment. I hear Ivy's voice joining the conversation, bright and curious, asking Julian about his work, about Seattle, about whether he remembers her father from college. College. Another lie, another layer of protection. Julian goes along with it, his voice warm as he tells my daughter that her father was always one of the smartest people he knew, always the one others turned to for advice and insight. The snow continues to fall outside, heavier now, coating the world in white silence. By morning, we may be snowed in, all of us trapped together in this house, where secrets have been buried for so long, they have become part of the foundation. I think about that photograph in my wallet, about the boy I was when it was taken, about the life I might have lived if courage had been stronger than fear. Finally, I force myself to move, to walk through my house toward the sound of voices, toward the moment I have been avoiding for 23 years. My hands shake slightly as I reach for the doorknob that separates my study from the hallway. On the other side of this door, my two worlds are about to meet, and I have no idea which one will survive the collision. When I finally enter the living room, Julian is sitting in my favorite chair, the leather armchair by the fireplace where I grade papers on winter evenings. He looks up as I appear in the doorway, and for a moment, time collapses entirely. His eyes are exactly as I remember them, dark brown with flecks of gold that catch the lamplight. The years have been kind to him in the way they are kind to men who have not spent decades forcing themselves into shapes that do not fit. Julian, Miriam is saying, her voice bright with the particular pleasure she takes in unexpected guests. This is my husband, Desmond. Though I suppose you two already know each other from college. He stands, extends his hand toward me, and I have no choice but to take it. His palm is warm, calloused in ways that speak of work with his hands, of creating things rather than simply maintaining them. The handshake lasts a fraction too long, his fingers pressing against mine with a pressure that could mean anything or nothing. "Desmond," he says, and my name in his voice is like hearing a song I thought I had forgotten. "You look exactly the same." This is not true. I know how I look, know the gray that has crept into my hair, the lines that bracket my mouth, the slight stoop to my shoulders that comes from years of bending over desks and books. But something in his eyes suggests he sees past all of that, sees something I thought had been buried so long ago it could never be excavated. Julian tells us he is an architect now, specializing in sustainable design, working mostly with clients who want to build homes that honor the landscape rather than dominate it. He speaks about his work with quiet passion, describing projects in the Pacific Northwest, houses that seem to grow from the earth itself. Miriam listens with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about solar panels and natural materials and the challenges of building in mountainous terrain. I say very little. I watch Julian's hands as he speaks, the way his fingers move to illustrate a point, the careful architecture of his gestures. These are the hands that once traced letters on my back in the darkness of our shared cabin, spelling out words we were too young and too afraid to say aloud. Ivy arrives home just as Miriam is insisting that Julian stay for dinner, her cheeks flushed from the cold, snowflakes melting in her dark hair. She bursts through the front door with the energy she has carried since childhood, filling rooms simply by entering them. Julian rises to meet her, and I watch as my daughter extends her hand with the confidence of someone who has never learned to be afraid of strangers. "You must be Ivy," Julian says. "Your father used to talk about you all the time in his letters." The words slip out before he can catch them, and I see the moment he realizes his mistake. Miriam's eyebrows lift slightly. Ivy looks confused. "In his letters?" she asks. "I thought you two lost touch after college." Julian recovers smoothly, the way architects must learn to do when measurements do not align, when foundations shift beneath carefully laid plans. "Email," he clarifies. "We exchanged emails occasionally over the years. Nothing regular, just updates about life, work, family." Another lie to add to the growing collection. I wonder how many more we will need before this evening ends, how many small deceptions it takes to protect a larger truth. Dinner unfolds with the strange, surreal quality of a dream. We sit at the same table where Miriam and I have shared thousands of meals, where we helped Ivy with homework, where we made plans for vacations and discussed household repairs and celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. Now Julian sits in the chair we usually reserve for guests, participating in our family rituals as if he belongs here, as if the past 23 years were simply a pause in an ongoing conversation. He compliments Miriam's cooking, asks thoughtful questions about Ivy's graduate program in environmental science, discusses literature with me in the careful way of old friends catching up. But beneath the surface politeness, there are currents I recognize, moments when our eyes meet across the table and hold for just a beat too long, when his voice takes on a particular gentleness that used to make my chest feel too small to contain everything I was feeling. The snow continues to fall outside our dining room windows, thick and steady now, the kind of storm that transforms the familiar landscape into something alien and beautiful. By the time we finish dessert, there are several inches on the ground, and the weather report on Ivy's phone predicts another 6 inches overnight. "You cannot possibly drive in this," Miriam declares, looking out at Julian's car, which has already disappeared beneath a blanket of white. "The guest room is made up. You will stay the night, and we will see what morning brings." Julian protests politely, mentions early meetings and the inconvenience, but Miriam waves away his objections with the firm kindness she uses on reluctant students at the library. "It is settled," she says. "No arguments." That night, after Ivy has gone to bed and Miriam has retreated to her evening routine of reading and herbal tea, I find myself unable to settle. I wander through the house, checking locks, adjusting thermostats, performing the small rituals that usually bring comfort. But tonight, nothing feels normal. The house seems different with Julian in it, as if his presence has shifted the molecular structure of everything I thought I knew. I step outside onto the back porch, not bothering with a coat, letting the cold shock my system into alertness. The snow muffles all sound, creating a pocket of silence so complete it feels sacred. I am standing there, watching my breath cloud in the frigid air, when I hear the back door open behind me. I do not turn around. I know it is Julian, know it with the same certainty I knew it was his car in the driveway. He moves to stand beside me at the porch railing, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his body, far enough that we are not touching. I used to think about this place, he says quietly, his voice barely audible above the whisper of falling snow. Every time I needed to feel safe. The words hang between us like a bridge I am not sure I am ready to cross. I do not respond, cannot respond, because anything I say will change everything, will crack open the careful shell I have built around my life. But I do not move away. Instead, I remain standing beside him in the snow-muffled silence. Two men who once loved each other watching winter claim the world we both know will look different in the morning light. The snow traps us for 3 days. What began as a typical Vermont winter storm becomes something more persistent, more deliberate, as if the weather itself has conspired to hold us all in this space together. The power flickers, but holds. The phone lines stay clear. But the roads become impassable. The driveway disappears beneath drifts that reach nearly to my waist. Julian extends his stay with apologies that sound increasingly hollow. He makes phone calls to clients, rescheduling meetings, explaining about unexpected weather delays. Miriam accepts his presence with the same grace she brings to everything, treating him like family, insisting he make himself at home. She does not seem to notice the way I watch him move through our house, the way I catalog his gestures like I am preparing for another 23 years of remembering. On the second morning, Julian and I begin walking the trails that wind through the woods behind our property. These are the same paths we walked as boys during those summer camp weeks, when we were 17 and the world felt infinite with possibility. The trees are bare now, their branches etched against the gray sky like charcoal drawings. Our footsteps crunch through snow that reaches our knees in places, creating a rhythm that feels like conversation even when we are not speaking. We talk carefully at first, like strangers learning each other's languages. Julian tells me about Seattle, about the apartment he rents near the water, about projects he has designed for clients who want to live more intentionally. He never married, he says, almost casually, as if this information does not carry weight. There was someone once, he adds, a relationship that lasted several years, but it ended amicably when they realized they wanted different futures. I tell him about teaching, about the satisfaction of watching 17-year-olds discover Whitman for the first time, about the frustration of standardized tests and budget cuts. I do not tell him about the nights I spend in my study, grading papers until my eyes burn, staying awake because sleep brings dreams I cannot afford to remember. I do not tell him about the mornings I wake up feeling like I am drowning in the life I have chosen. But gradually, inevitably, our conversations begin to circle closer to the center, to the questions that have been waiting between us for more than 2 decades. On the third morning, as we pause at the clearing where an old stone wall marks the boundary of our property, Julian finally asks the question I have been dreading. Why did you never answer my letters? His voice is quiet, matter of fact, but I hear the years of hurt beneath the surface. I look at the stone wall, built by hands that have been dust for generations, and try to find words for something I have never been able to explain, even to myself. I was afraid, I say finally, of what people would think, of what it would mean, of losing everything I thought I was supposed to want. And did you? He asks. Want those things? I consider lying, consider giving him the answer that would preserve the fiction we have been maintaining. Instead, I tell him the truth. I thought I did. I convinced myself I did. But standing here with you, I realize I spent so many years trying to want the right things that I forgot how to know what I actually wanted. We walk deeper into the woods, following trails that seem to remember our feet even after all these years. Julian talks about his own journey, about the years he spent trying to understand why love felt so complicated, why the relationships that looked right from the outside always felt hollow at the center. He tells me about therapy, about learning to accept parts of himself he had been taught to hide, about the slow work of building a life that felt authentic rather than performative. I have never been to therapy. I have never spoken these thoughts aloud to anyone. But walking beside Julian through snow-covered woods, I find myself saying things I have never admitted, even in the privacy of my own mind. I tell him about the nights I lie awake next to Miriam, feeling like an actor who has forgotten his lines. I tell him about watching other couples and wondering if what they have is real or if everyone is just performing the same elaborate charade. I tell him about the stories I stopped writing because they kept revealing truths I was not ready to face. When we return to the house, Miriam is in the kitchen, preparing lunch with the quiet efficiency that marks all her domestic routines. She looks up as we enter, our cheeks flushed from the cold, our boots leaving puddles of melted snow on her clean floors. Something passes across her face, too quick for me to interpret, but I see her watching us more carefully now, her eyes taking in details I hope she cannot decode. That evening, as the three of us sit by the fire, Miriam makes conversation about local news, about changes in the town since Julian last visited. When was that exactly? She asks, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. I realize she has been keeping track of inconsistencies, cataloging the small contradictions in our story. Julian handles the question smoothly, mentions a brief visit years ago, something vague about a business trip. But I see Miriam filing the information away, adding it to whatever conclusion she is building in her methodical librarian's mind. Later, after she has gone to bed, I find Julian in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed with a sketchbook open in his lap. He looks up as I appear in the doorway, and for a moment, neither of us speaks. The book in his hands is filled with drawings, architectural sketches mixed with more personal images. I can see the edge of one page, a pencil drawing of our old bench beneath the maple tree, and two figures sitting close together, their hands almost touching. I should leave. I should say goodnight and retreat to my own room, to my own bed, to the safety of distance. Instead, I step into the room and close the door quietly behind me. Julian sets the sketchbook aside and looks at me with an expression I recognize from 23 years ago, hopeful and terrified, and utterly vulnerable. We do not touch. Not yet. But the space between us feels charged with possibility, with all the words we have not yet found the courage to say. Outside, the snow continues to fall, trapping us here together in this moment that feels both inevitable and impossible, both ending and beginning. The power goes out on the fourth night, just as we are finishing dinner. The lights flicker once, twice, then die completely, plunging us into the blue-gray darkness of a winter evening. Miriam moves through the house with practiced efficiency, lighting candles she keeps in strategic locations, the kind of preparedness that comes from decades of Vermont winters. Soon the house glows with warm, dancing light that transforms familiar spaces into something more intimate, more mysterious. Ivy retreats to her room with a book and a flashlight, claiming she wants to finish a chapter before the cold drives her under extra blankets. Miriam settles into her chair by the fireplace with her knitting, the click of her needles creating a gentle rhythm in the quiet house. I should join her, should sit in my usual spot and read by candlelight, should maintain the domestic tableau we have perfected over 20 years of marriage. Instead, I find myself drawn to my study, to the wooden box hidden in my desk drawer. By candlelight, I finally open the letters I have been avoiding for so long. Julian's handwriting has changed over the years, evolved from the careful script of a 17-year-old to the confident strokes of a man who has learned to trust his own thoughts. The early letters are full of questions, of hope that I will respond, of invitations to visit or meet somewhere neutral. The later ones grow more philosophical, more accepting of silence, but they never stop coming. I spread them across my desk chronologically, watching the arc of his life unfold in birthday wishes and holiday greetings, in descriptions of cities where he has lived and projects he has completed. There are no demands, no anger, no accusations. Just a steady stream of connection offered year after year to someone who never wrote back. The most recent letter, the one that arrived 2 weeks ago, sits unopened in my hands. I break the seal carefully, as if the paper might crumble at my touch. Inside, his words are simple and direct. I am thinking of you more often lately, he writes. I am tired of wondering what might have been. I have decided to drive through Vermont this winter. I hope it would not be an imposition to see you again. Julian finds me there, surrounded by 23 years of one-sided correspondence, the candle flame reflecting off tears I did not realize I was crying. He stands in the doorway without speaking, taking in the scene, understanding immediately what this moment means. Then he steps into the room and closes the door behind him. I never stopped writing to you, he says quietly, even when I knew you would never write back. I look up at him through the wavering candlelight. This man who has carried our shared history alone for more than 2 decades, who has offered connection without asking for anything in return. You should have stopped, I tell him. You should have found someone who could love you properly, openly, without all this fear. Julian moves closer, close enough that I can see the way the candlelight catches the silver in his hair, the lines that time has traced around his eyes. Maybe, he says, but I never wanted someone else. I only ever wanted you. The words hang between us like a bridge I have been afraid to cross for half my lifetime. I think of all the letters I never wrote, all the phone calls I never made, all the chances I let slip away because choosing love felt like choosing chaos, choosing uncertainty, choosing a life I did not know how to live. You were the only place I ever felt safe, Julian continues, his voice breaking slightly. Not just physically safe, but safe to be myself, to want what I wanted, to love without apology. When I lost you, I lost that feeling for a very long time. He reaches out then, not for a kiss, not for an embrace, but for the simplest possible connection. His fingers brush against mine where they rest on the desk, skin touching skin for the first time in 23 years. I do not pull away. I cannot pull away. The contact sends electricity through my entire body, awakening nerves I thought had died from disuse. We do not kiss. Not yet. But something passes between us in that moment. Some recognition that the careful walls we have both built are finally crumbling. I look at our hands, his fingers covering mine, and remember what it felt like to be 17 and certain that love was enough to overcome anything. I chose safety over truth, I tell him, my voice barely above a whisper. I told myself that what we had was just a phase, just confusion, just something I needed to outgrow. But it never was. I have known it every single day since I last saw you. I just did not know how to live with that knowledge. Julian's eyes fill with tears that catch the candlelight like stars. Then let me stay this time, he says. Let me stay and we can figure out how to live with it together. The candle flame flickers between us, casting shadows that dance across the walls of my study, across the letters that document years of patient waiting, across 2 faces that are no longer 17, but still recognize each other across the distance time has created. Outside, the snow continues to fall, but the storm feels different now, less like imprisonment and more like protection, as if the world has wrapped itself around us to give us the space we need to remember who we used to be, who we still are beneath the careful roles we have learned to play. I think about Miriam downstairs, about Ivy in her room, about the life I have built that suddenly feels both precious and impossible to sustain. I think about Julian's apartment in Seattle, about the possibility of different choices, about what it might mean to choose truth over safety for the first time in my adult life. But mostly I think about his hand covering mine, about the way 23 years of silence have collapsed into this single moment of contact, about how some forms of love wait patiently through decades of winter until the right storm comes to finally set them free. The conversation with Miriam happens on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the power returned, 2 days after the roads were cleared enough for Julian to leave, but he chose not to. The kitchen is filled with thin February light, the kind that promises spring is still months away, but at least acknowledges its eventual possibility. Miriam sits across from me at our breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that has gone cold, her eyes holding a mixture of sadness and something that might be relief. I have been rehearsing this moment for days, trying to find words that will cause the least damage, that will honor what we have built together while acknowledging what has been broken from the beginning. But sitting here now, looking at this woman who has shared my life for more than half of it, I realize there are no words gentle enough for this kind of truth. I tell her carefully, slowly, that I have loved someone else for a very long time. I do not tell her everything, but I tell her enough. That it was not her fault. That I tried to be the husband she deserved. That I buried something so deep I convinced myself it had died, but it never did. That it has been eating away at both of us, this space between what we have and what we might have had if I had been honest from the beginning. Miriam does not cry, though I see tears gathering in her eyes like rain clouds that refuse to break. Instead, she nods slowly, as if I am confirming something she has suspected for years but never allowed herself to fully acknowledge. I always wondered if there was someone, she says quietly. I just never thought it would be him. The simplicity of her statement cuts deeper than anger would have. She has known, on some level, has been living with the ghost of my divided heart without ever naming it. I think of all the nights we lay beside each other in careful silence, all the conversations that skated across the surface of our lives without ever diving deep, all the ways we learned to love each other around the empty spaces I could never explain. Do you hate me? I ask, because I need to know, because the weight of her potential anger feels lighter than the weight of her continued kindness. She considers this question seriously, looking out the window at the maple tree where Julian has taken to sitting in the mornings, sketching the landscape, or simply watching the world wake up. I think I wish I did, she says finally. It would be easier if I could hate you. But no, I am angry, and I am hurt, and I feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. But I do not hate you. We sit in silence for a long time. Two people who have shared a life trying to figure out how to untangle it without destroying everything we have built together. Miriam asks practical questions about the house, about finances, about how we will explain this to our friends and neighbors who have always seen us as the stable couple, the ones who made it work when so many others failed. I tell her I do not have answers yet, that I am still learning how to live with the truth I have been avoiding for so long. But I promise her that we will figure it out together, that she will not be abandoned or forgotten, that whatever comes next will honor what we have meant to each other even as we acknowledge what we could never be. The conversation with Ivy is harder in different ways. She comes home from her morning run to find me waiting in the living room, and something in my expression makes her pause in the doorway, still breathing hard from exertion. She sits across from me with the wariness of someone who has learned that serious conversations usually bring unwelcome news. I tell her a version of the truth adapted for a daughter who should not have to carry the full weight of her father's complicated history. I explain that I have been struggling with questions about who I am, about what I want from life, about whether the choices I made when I was young were the right ones. I tell her that I care deeply about someone who is not her mother, that this has been true for a very long time, and that I cannot continue pretending otherwise. Ivy listens without interrupting, her face cycling through confusion, disappointment, and something that might be understanding. When I finish, she asks the question I have been dreading. Are you gay, Dad? The word hangs in the air between us, simple and complex and loaded with decades of fear and shame and careful avoidance. I think about all the ways I could answer this question, all the qualifications and explanations and nuances that feel true to my experience. Instead, I give her the simplest response I can manage. I do not know what label fits. But yes, I am in love with a man. I have been in love with the same man for most of my adult life. She nods slowly, processing this information with the resilience of her generation, for whom these conversations are more common, less catastrophic than they were when I was her age. Are you happy? She asks finally. Not yet, I tell her honestly, but I think I might be. That evening, I find Julian by the fireplace, his bags packed, and sitting by the front door. He looks up as I enter the room, his face carefully neutral, prepared for whatever decision I have reached. For a moment, I think he is going to say goodbye, going to save me from having to choose by choosing for me. Instead, he stands and moves toward the door, his hand reaching for his coat. I should go, he says quietly. I have caused enough disruption to your life. But I cross the room before he can put on his jacket, before he can walk out of my life again and leave me with another 23 years of wondering what might have been. I reach out and touch his arm, stopping him mid-motion. Stay, I say. The word comes out stronger than I expected, clearer than I have felt about anything in decades. Julian turns to look at me, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. Stay, I repeat. Please. Spring comes slowly to Vermont, the way it always has, the way it always will. The snow retreats gradually, revealing patches of brown earth that look wounded at first, but slowly remember how to be green. Julian and I sit on the porch bench in the late afternoon light, watching the world soften around us. There are no grand gestures here, no dramatic declarations. Just two men in their late 40s learning how to be still together, learning how to occupy the same space without apology. The house is quieter now. Miriam moved into the cottage at the edge of our property in early March, a small place that belonged to my grandmother, that has sat empty for years waiting for someone who needed solitude. She comes by most mornings for coffee, helps tend the garden we planted together, maintains the rhythms of friendship that we are slowly building from the bones of our marriage. It is not what either of us expected from our lives, but it is honest in a way our marriage never quite managed to be. Some nights, she stays for dinner, and the three of us navigate conversations about books and local politics and Ivy's graduate work with the careful courtesy of people learning new choreography. Other evenings, she retreats to her cottage with a book and a glass of wine, leaving Julian and me to discover what domesticity looks like when it is chosen rather than assumed. Ivy visits more often now, driving up from her university on weekends with laundry and questions and the particular intensity of someone trying to understand how her parents' story has been rewritten. She is kinder about the changes than I have any right to expect, though I catch her studying Julian sometimes with the protective wariness of a daughter who wants to believe her father deserves happiness, but needs to be sure this man will not disappear again. Julian fits into our routines the way morning light fits into familiar rooms, gradually and then completely. He has converted the small barn into a studio where he works on architectural drawings and personal projects, sketches that range from sustainable housing designs to studies of the way shadows fall across our kitchen table at different times of day. He drives into town twice a week to teach a continuing education class on environmental design at the community college, sharing his knowledge with retired teachers and young parents who dream of building homes that honor the landscape. Life continues, fractured but honest. The fractures themselves become part of the beauty, the way a well-mended bowl is sometimes stronger than it was before it broke. Our neighbors have adjusted to the changes with the mixture of curiosity and acceptance that small communities offer to people who have lived among them long enough to earn the benefit of the doubt. Some relationships have cooled, others have surprised me with their warmth. Mrs. Henderson from down the road brings us tomatoes from her garden the same way she always has, though she now asks after Miriam's cottage and Julian's work with genuine interest. I have begun writing again. In longhand, at the desk in my study that faces the woods Julian and I walk through each morning. The stories that emerge are different from what I wrote in college, more patient, more interested in the spaces between words than in the words themselves. They are stories about return rather than escape, about the courage required to live truthfully in middle age, about love that survives decades of silence and emerges transformed but recognizable. Julian reads these stories sometimes, offers gentle suggestions about rhythm and clarity, but mostly he simply witnesses their existence the way he witnessed my silence for 23 years. Patient, constant, without demands. We do not talk much about the future in concrete terms. Julian's lease in Seattle expires in the fall, and his belongings remain mostly boxed in the barn studio, as if he is still not entirely certain this life will hold. But each week he stays feels more permanent, more settled into the rhythms we are creating together. The teaching position at the high school will be mine for as long as I want it, and I find I still love standing in front of 17-year-olds talking about Thoreau and Whitman and the courage required to live deliberately. Some of my students have begun asking different questions in class, more personal inquiries about truth and authenticity and the price of conformity. I answer them as honestly as I can, hoping that my own late-blooming honesty might give them permission to find their truths earlier than I found mine. Evening settles around us on the porch, the air carrying the scent of apple blossoms and the promise of summer. Julian reaches over and takes my hand, a gesture so simple it still surprises me with its power. His fingers are warm, calloused from working with his hands, familiar now in ways they never were when we were 17. I think about the photograph in my wallet, the one of two boys who believed they could love each other without consequence. They were wrong about the consequences, but they were right about the love. It has survived everything we threw at it, all the silence and distance and careful forgetting. It has waded through marriages and careers and decades of pretending, patient as the seasons, constant as the stone walls that mark the boundaries of this land. Julian shifts beside me, his shoulder pressing against mine. The contact is warm and grounding, a reminder that this is real, that we are here, that we have finally learned how to choose each other. He did not fix me. He did not save me. He just waited long enough for me to come home.